Relationship troubles. Every relationship has its ups and downs, right? Sometimes that includes the love of your life accusing you of cutting someone's car brakes up out of petty jealousy. Sam and I had been dating for 5 years. At that point, he wasn't perfect. Nobody was, myself included. But often, he came as close to perfect as a person could. We would fight occasionally. They were mostly just petty squabbles, but there'd be the occasional yelling when things got really tense. But we always managed to work things out because at the end of the day, we loved each other. I always thought we were doing better than most when it came to our relationship. But I'd soon learned that all it took was an element of chaos to send even the most perfect relationship spiraling. In our case, it started off with a simple question. You know Connor, right? I looked up from when I was curled on the bed, scrolling through my phone. Sam had just gotten out of the shower, one towel tied around his waist, another draped over his broad shoulders. His curly dark hair was still a bit damp. I tried to focus less on the singular drop of water gliding down his abdomen, and more on the concerned, thoughtful expression on his face. Connor, I repeated, confused. From work. You've met him a few times, he said. I was quiet as I tried to put a face to the name. One popped up eventually. A rather lanky man, deeply tanned skin, auburn hair. I had met him a handful of times at the social events, Sam's workplace threw, that he decided to take me to. He'd always introduced me as his Henry to his coworkers, and they'd either laugh or coo about how cute we were. The only things I really remembered about Connor were the beauty marks under his eye and lip, and the fact that he had been the only one to respond to my Henry with a completely straight face. Yeah, I remember him, I finally answered with a nod. He'd your friend, right? Sam gave a long sigh as he came to sit on the edge of the bed, shoulders slightly hunched. Worried, I sat up and crawled over, sitting beside him. Was there bad news? I gently held onto his arm, waiting for him to explain what was wrong. You know what happened at work recently? He started, rubbing the back of his neck. I nodded. Recently, the company Sam worked at, a cybersecurity firm, had a series of layoffs due to financial issues. Thankfully, Sam hadn't been one of them, but it sounded like Connor had. In the next instant, Sam confirmed my suspicions. Well, he's out of a job now. On such a short notice, too. It's really hard on him. Sam sighed again. I frowned, leaning into him. Ouch, that sucks, I sympathized. He must be struggling, yeah? Anything we can do to help him? Sam fell silent. I could see him chewing on the inside of his cheek. I knew that meant that he had something he really wanted to say, but he was too nervous to say it. Babe? I coaxed, my voice gentle. Sam winced, sucking in a slow breath. Well, there is one thing he needs. Place to stay, he finally said. I blinked, staying quiet and waiting for him to elaborate. But of course, I already had a fairly good idea of what he was trying to insinuate. Only be for a few weeks, Sam quickly explained, likely noticing the perplexed expression on my face. A month or two, max, until he can find somewhere else to stay. I gave a confused laugh. Baby, I don't know what you mean. You mean he's gonna stay here? With us? Sam smiled weakly, a pleading look in his large brown eyes. We have the space, don't we? We did. Our apartment wasn't absurdly spacious or anything, but we had an extra guest room and a bathroom aside from the ones we shared. But that was usually reserved for relatives and friends who were staying for just a couple of days. I pulled back from him, frowning. Well, yeah, sure, but that's besides the point. I barely know him, and this is such a short notice. I know, sweetness, Sam said, his tone soft. He reached out and gently kneaded at the furrow between my brows with his thumb, a soothing gesture. I felt my shoulders relax slightly. He's not very keen on it himself, but it's a bit of an emergency. I've known him for 2 years now. I can vouch for him. He's a good guy. You'll hardly notice he's here. I was, of course, still hesitant, but Sam's voice always made me soften up. He could tell I was about to cave in, so he wrapped his arm around me, pulling me onto his lap and nuzzling his face onto my hair. I sighed, staring at the ceiling. This man. Please, sweetness, he mumbled, voice slightly muffled by my long fair hair. I sighed again and shut my eyes. Fine, but he can't stay here for too long, all right? You know I'm not too fond of strangers in my space, I grumbled, reaching my hands up to gently stroke his own hair. I felt him smile against my cheek. Thank you, baby. I promise he's a great guy. It'll work out, yeah? I decided to trust Sam. He'd always been a very positive-minded person, while I was a realist, though he'd often say I bordered very heavily on just being very pessimistic. I tended to doubt people, while he'd give them as many benefits of the doubts as he could muster. As he gently guided me back onto the bed to kiss me, I decided I'd trust his judgment and let Connor stay with us. If Sam liked Connor enough to offer him a space in our space, then surely he couldn't be that bad of a guy, right? I figured he'd at most be a little irritating. I let those thoughts soothe my worries along with Sam's lips on mine. I glanced down to see his towel was already precariously hanging off his hips. Knowing it would soon be coming off soon anyway, I reached down to fully tug it loose. Connor showed up 3 days later. Prior to his arrival, it had been a peaceful Saturday. I had been in my studio working on a commission when Sam poked his head into the room to let me know that he was leaving to pick Connor up. I barely heard him, too engrossed in my work, and simply waved my hand vaguely in response. Half an hour later, I heard the front door unlock and Sam called for me. I realized then that I'd have to greet our guest and temporary roommate in my paint-stained work clothes. Well, I was certainly a bit embarrassed about that, but he'd have to get used to seeing me like that eventually. Art was my job after all, so it was better sooner than later. I left my studio and headed to the living room, where Sam was waiting for me, along with a vaguely familiar face. Standing beside my partner was Connor, dressed in a casual hoodie and jeans. I rubbed my hands on my already stained pants to get rid of whatever leftover paint might be there as I walked over, smiling at him. "Hi there," I said cheerfully, reaching a hand out to him. He gave me a smile back, reaching out to take my hand. His grip was firm as he shook my hand. "Hey Henry, it's great to meet you again. Gosh, I can't begin to thank you enough for agreeing to let me stay here. I know it's such short notice. I promise I won't be too much of a bother." I let my smile widen into a grin, shaking my head. "Hey, don't worry about it. Happy to help, Despite my worries, he seemed like a pretty nice guy. He had at least made a good first impression. Perhaps my worries had been for nothing. Perhaps he'd be a perfectly nice, polite, and pleasant roommate. Perhaps we'd even become close friends. As one often does, I'd already come up with a few possibilities for where our relationship could go in the future. I tried to stay positive, which was pretty easy to do with both he and Sam smiling at me. Yeah, I thought, this might not be so bad. Oh, how wrong I ended up being. The first week wasn't too bad. This was the settling period, of course, and we were all still trying to get used to each other. During that week, I didn't see Connor all that often. He spent quite a bit of time in the guest room, his room, for that period of time, on his computer. I assumed he was job hunting. Still, we'd run into each other occasionally, especially since I worked from home. He'd pop out of his room to get himself something to eat, and I'd spot him. These were good times. We'd simply say hi to each other and ask him if he was settling in okay. If he needed anything, blah blah blah. And then we'd go our separate ways. Our conversations were short, but pleasant. If things would just stay like this, it really won't be that bad, I thought. They did not stay that way. Connor and Sam had already been friends before he moved in with us, so they naturally spent more time with each other. I didn't mind this. What I did mind, however, was how it started to seem like he wanted Sam spending as little time with me as possible when he was home. He'd arrive and Connor was always frighteningly quick to go up to him first to welcome him. I tried to curb the annoyance that would bubble up within me whenever this happened. They're friends, I tell myself. Of course they'd want to spend time with each other. But that was just the first of the problems I had with our new roommate. He displayed rather quickly a terrible tendency to be selfish. On the nights I was able to, I'd make dinner for Sam and I. When Connor came into the picture, I had no problems with adding him to that equation. Sure, he was living there practically free of charge, but it didn't seem right for me to not feed someone living under my roof. Of course, Connor himself had no issues with this arrangement either. However, he was way too comfortable being stingy with stuff he wasn't even paying for. He'd often cook meals for himself without regard for anyone else in the house, which wouldn't have been a problem if he hadn't been completely using up the ingredients he didn't even bother to replace. This extended to things other than food as well. One night, I stepped into the kitchen to get a roll of toilet paper to replace in our personal bathroom. Conveniently, I spotted an unopened roll sitting on the counter. Not thinking much of it, I grabbed it and took it to our bathroom. When I returned to the kitchen, Connor was in there, looking around with visibly irritated expression on his face. "What's up?" I asked as I went over to the fridge to grab myself a bottle of water. He glanced over at me, frowning. "Oh hey Henry, did you see some toilet paper around here? I bought some out to take to my room, but I got a call and forgot to take it back with me," he explained. "Ah," I paused to gulp some water down. "You brought that out? We needed some too, so I took it back to our room. Sorry about that." It was a simple situation, really. It wasn't like we were out of toilet paper either. There was more in one of those overhead cabinets. Regardless, his face twisted into an unpleasant scowl. "Oh, okay, that's fine." I wish you could have just gotten another one, though, he mumbled as he turned to face the cabinet. Surprised, I blinked. I mean, yeah, but I didn't know you brought it out. Sam could have. I frowned slightly. Either way, I'm sorry. Here, let me help you get that. I started to approach to help him get another roll, but he held a hand out in a very don't bother manner, stopping me in my tracks. I simply turned and headed back to my room, mostly because I've already felt my irritation threatening to spill out, more than I would have liked to. That night, Sam and I had our first argument about Connor. It wasn't even a proper argument. We spoke to each other in hushed, clipped tones. I was overreacting, he said. It was normal for someone to be annoyed by that kind of thing. But that was just the first of many. The weeks passed and things only grew more and more tense as I started to get more and more irritated by Connor's presence. I noted very quickly that he only ever acted rudely to me, which was likely part of why Sam never took my complaining seriously. It was odd in a way that almost seemed calculated. I'd soon find out that I was completely right to suspect this. A month and a half passed. To my frustration, Connor's presence had caused a noticeable rift between Sam and me, as any mention of his behavior would almost certainly set a sour mood over the conversation. And God forbid I tried asking about when he would be leaving. It only made that mistake once, but I learned from the experience not to bring that up for a while. During dinner one evening, though, Connor brought it up himself. I landed an interview, he said casually. The job seems to be pretty good. Hey, that's awesome, Sam said with a wide grin. I stayed quiet but smiled as I ate. As if noticing my silence, Connor fixed his gaze on me, still smiling. Yep, if all goes well, I might be out of your hair quicker than planned, Henry Connor said. My smile fell, eyes growing wide. Quickly, my gaze darted to Sam, and he was frowning, sure enough. Looking back to Connor, I laughed nervously. I mean, take your time, it's just been a little over a month. Usually it takes a bit more than that for someone to get on their feet. Dinner proceeded like normal after that, but things were awkward. Sure enough, Connor's casual comment caused trouble for me when Sam and I were in private. See, Henry? He knows you don't like him, Sam complained, hands on his hips, irritated. I clicked my tongue. He brought that out of nowhere. I didn't even say anything to him, I retorted, frustrated. Why did we keep fighting over this guy? It was getting exhausting. It's not about what you said or didn't say at the table, Sam sighed. Henry clearly doesn't feel welcome. Well, maybe if I didn't act entitled to our stuff all the time, I'd be encouraged to feel more welcoming, I snapped. Keep your voice down, Sam whispered in a hiss. He's our guest. He's a moocher. Henry, we're helping him. He's our friend. He's your friend. All he is to me is something that's coming between us. We're arguing constantly over him, Sam. I'm so tired. I could feel the tension between my brows, and I wanted nothing more than for him to rub that spot lovingly, like he often did when he wanted to calm me down. But things had been getting so cold between us that it was freaking me out. We hadn't even been intimate with each other in over 2 weeks. Overwhelmed, I left the room without bothering to wait for a response. I needed some time alone, and some wine. Unfortunately, Connor was already in the kitchen, fishing through the fridge. He didn't see me immediately, thankfully, or he would have seen the utterly irritated expression that crossed my face the moment I spotted him. When he looked up, I managed to force my face into a small smile. I didn't bother saying anything as I walked past him to where we kept our wine. He stood up straight, smiling oddly at me with a piece of cake in his hand. Anything wrong? He asked, looking away. I shook my head quietly as I grabbed one of our glasses. Just leave, I thought. Another argument? I turned back to look at him, shocked, not just by the brazen words themselves, but by the nearly triumphant tone in his voice. Sure enough, his smile widened to a grin as he shut the fridge door with his hip and leaned against it. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the quiet humming of the fridge. Pardon? I asked weakly. Maybe I'd misheard. There was no way he would have had the audacity to... I asked if you guys had another argument, he repeated casually. About how you don't like me. Been having a lot of those, yeah? My shock morphed into hot anger. He not only knew about the tension he was causing between us, but he was enjoying it. My expression must have betrayed my rage, because he shook his head, still smiling. Hey, be careful. If you start yelling at me now, it's going to cause even more trouble. Connor's voice was smug. I found myself shocked again as he simply turned and walked out of the room, placed for a bit. I tried to make sense of the situation. It couldn't be that Connor was purposely trying to get between us, right? No, that couldn't be it. This wasn't a movie. It was real life. That kind of thing would just be crazy, right? I looked down at the wine glass in my hand. Then I put it away, grabbed a bigger one, and filled it to the brim. It was a subtle shift at first, but after that evening, Connor went from a nuisance to an active threat. Quickly, it became clear what he was trying to do. As things grew more tense between Sam and me, Connor weaseled his way closer and closer to Sam's side. They had longer and longer meetings, with Connor soon inviting Sam to sit and chat with him in his room frequently. The entire time, he would purposely try to antagonize me and get under my skin. Knowing he was doing it on purpose didn't make it easier for me to ignore him. How could I ignore someone who was actively trying to wreck my home? Eventually, I had enough. One afternoon, when Sam wasn't home, I confronted him. To my surprise, he was completely upfront about his intentions. "Am I trying to steal him away?" Connor repeated my words back to me in a mocking tone. "Honestly, yeah." I blinked, shocked by his shamelessness. We were in his room, Connor lounging casually on the bed. I've been into Sam for years now, you know. When he told me he had a boyfriend, I got so depressed. He was my hot work crush, Connor set up. I might not have work anymore, but I'll have him. And there's nothing you can do about that. He's already starting to like me. He's bluffing, I thought, as I stared at his smug, lazy smile. He has to be. Yet I couldn't help but think of all the time the two had been spending together. All the conversations they'd had that I knew nothing about. Stiffly, I turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. Enraged, I chewed on my thumbnail. "I'll let you into my space and you respond by trying to ruin my life? You're done for. I'm telling Sam everything when he gets back." I was so sure he would believe me. We'd been dating for years. We lived together, had laughed and cried together. I was so sure that he would trust me. Unfortunately, I got a reality check when Sam got home. For the first time in over 2 years, we fought loud, enough for the neighbors to hear. "Sam, why won't you listen to me?" I yelled, frustrated. I stepped in front of Sam, grabbing him by the shoulders. "I'm telling you, this guy is bad news. He's trying to steal you away from me." Sam glared down at me, clenching his jaw. "Look, I know you can be paranoid sometimes, but you need to cut it out. You're acting crazy. He's my friend. Why are you getting so jealous?" "He told me himself that's what he's trying to do. He wants to break us up." My voice was shrill, and I could barely hold back the tears of frustrated anger. I probably sounded hysterical. In a way, I was. Sam shrugged my hands off. "Henry, stop it. I'm not kicking Connor out until he's completely on his feet. And that's final. You'd better get over whatever is bothering you, because it's really starting to get on my last nerve." His voice was calm, but so stern and cold that it made a chill pass over me. I breathed out in disbelief as Sam turned and walked out of the room. Seconds later, I heard the front door open and shut. When he got angry, but it didn't want to yell at me, he'd usually take a drive around the neighborhood to blow off some steam. I sank onto the bed in disbelief, knowing that just a few feet away in the guest room I had decorated years before, Connor was sitting on that bed, pleased with himself. I couldn't believe this was real. The two only became closer as time went on. Connor had been staying with us for nearly 3 months now, far longer than the time he had initially been supposed to stay. But of course, Sam didn't mind. Their shared interest frightened me. Sam had always loved video games, and while I had certainly never turned my nose up at them, they'd never been my thing. But they were certainly Connor's thing, and the two would spend hours in the living room together, laughing as they played games with each other. They bonded so fast and so well that I felt completely helpless, and Connor relished the damage he was doing to our relationship. He took full advantage of how little Sam seemed to trust me. I couldn't bring up Connor's confession anymore. It only served to make Sam angry again. All I could do was hope that Connor wouldn't succeed in trying to take Sam away from me, that Sam cherished our relationship enough to not let himself be manipulated like that. One afternoon, to my horror, Sam let me know that he'd be lending Connor my car to go to the party with his friends. Of course, I strongly protested this. "I'd give him mine, but I'll be using it later tonight," Sam explained. "You aren't going anywhere anytime soon, are you?" "No, but I don't want to give him my car." "Where is he even going with it?" I asked. Frantic, Sam shrugged. "He's just going out with a few friends. Don't worry, I trust him," he said. "I don't. He's not using my car," I insisted. Sam's expression shifted into a frown. He didn't say anything, but his gaze spelled out his thoughts loud and clear. "Don't start." I fell silent. I wasn't in the mood to fight that day. Still stewing in anger, I turned away and let the conversation end. Maybe if Connor came back with my car trashed, I'd finally give him a good reason to sock him in the face. He did trash my car, but hardly in the way I expected. At around 2 a.m., Sam was shaking me awake. I stared up at him, bleary-eyed and groggy, as he told me that Connor and his friends had gotten into a car accident. Instantly, I was shocked full awake. We both rushed to the hospital in Sam's car. Upon getting there, we found that, thankfully, neither Connor nor his friends had been gravely injured. My car, however... "The brakes failed randomly," Connor explained. "We veered off the road, crashed right into a tree. Sorry, man." I frowned, running my fingers through my hair. Well, it was a good thing no one had died or anything, but how was I supposed to get around without a car now? Especially to do stuff like meeting up with clients and delivering commissions. And what did he mean by the brakes randomly failing? I'd never had problems with my brakes before. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had held this train of thought. I glanced towards Sam and saw him glaring right at me. My brows raised in surprise as I suddenly got a very, very bad feeling in my stomach. "Henry," he started, his voice cold as he turned his body to face me. "What did you do to that car?" I jumped, startled by the accusation. What? What are you talking about?" I stuttered out. "You messed with those brakes, didn't you? So he wouldn't be able to stop the car?" I was floored. My boyfriend, my partner, the love of my life was standing in front of me, accusing me of trying to get a group of people hurt and possibly killed out of jealousy. I felt my body grow stiff as a board. "Let's go home," I said quietly. Sam blinked in surprise, scowling. "What?" he asked. I said, "Let's go home. This is a public space," I hissed. I had to stay calm. I didn't want to cause a scene. Not here. Not in public. Sam seemed to understand, visibly trying to calm himself down as well. He turned to Connor, who had stayed quiet the entire time, to say goodbye to him. As we left, Connor glanced at me and smiled. The drive back home was silent, for a few seconds. By the time we were parked in front of the apartment building, we were already screaming at each other. "He's insane and he's a homewrecker, but I wouldn't try to kill him and 4 other people. Do you know what you're accusing me of? Your car has never had brake problems. Are you saying he just set that up himself? He is insane and a homewrecker, Samuel. He very well could have." Our neighbors had to come outside to separate us. When they did, Sam simply got into his car and sped off. He didn't say anything, but I knew he was gone. Good riddance, I thought. I wanted nothing to do with someone who didn't trust me and would rather believe a stranger than his own partner. At least that's what I told myself, but that didn't stop me from sobbing into my pillow the entire night. I didn't leave the bed, our bed, for over a day. In fact, I only moved when I heard the front door unlock. Sam walked into the room, not sparing me a single glance as he began to pack up his things. I sat up. "So you're just gonna leave?" I croaked out, stiffly. Sam nodded. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Connor and I found a place," he said simply. I swallowed the painful lump in my throat and stayed silent. When he was done, he zipped up his suitcase and turned to leave. Despite everything, I found myself reaching out to beg him to stay. Before he could say anything, he was already gone. That was that. I fell into a scary bout of depression after that. I couldn't work. I could barely eat. I had people coming over to check on me, but I was inconsolable for the longest time. It was only after a month that I started to find myself again. I had come to terms with the fact that Sam really was gone, and likely wouldn't be coming back. Connor had gotten what he wanted. I started to paint again, not as work, but to soothe myself. I started to eat again, trying to take care of myself. It hurt, of course, but healing was slowly starting to look more possible. And then one afternoon, I got a knock at the door. Thinking it was one of my friends, I went to open it, and there was Sam. He had certainly looked better. He had dark bags under his eyes and clearly hadn't shaved in a while. My eyes widened in shock and recoiled back in an instant. Sam was on his knees. "Henry, I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. You were right. Connor had set everything up. He told me himself. He thought I wouldn't leave because he had already had me." His eyes filled with tears as he gazed up at me. "Henry, I'm so sorry." My breath caught in my throat. This is what I dreamed of. So often had I imagined Sam coming back to beg like this. Now I was getting what I wanted, but... "Are you serious?" I laughed in disbelief. "Why would I forgive someone who can't even trust me?" Sam had nothing to say in his defense. I wanted to shut the door on him. I wanted to kick him out, ask him to never show his face in front of me ever again. But I remembered the day he asked me to be his, 4th of April, 5 years in the past. He had gotten on his knees, just like he was now. I sighed and shook my head slowly. "Get up, come inside, we need to talk." Things wouldn't go back to the way they were, not for a long time, but maybe, just maybe, we could start over. Maybe we could learn to trust each other again. As for Connor, he of course got kicked out of the place they had gone, and was left with nowhere to live again. Sam and I never heard much of what happened to him after that. Last we heard, he'd gotten a job at a fast food restaurant. Sam promised he would make it up to me. He would always trust me going forward. Nice words, but he would have to prove this to me with his actions if he ever wanted my trust again. but I was willing to give him one more chance. The end. What would you do if your lover believed a friend over you? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.